Okay, welcome. We're going to get started. My name is Nerea Haas. I'm the Marketing Associate at Collins Group, a division of Campbell Company. Thank you for joining us today for Giving USA 2015, Implications for the Northwest. I'm here with Aggie Sweeney, President and CEO of Collins Group, and we are broadcasting live from our offices in Seattle. Also joining us today are Bob Hoover, Executive Director of the Idaho Community Foundation, Beth Stipe, Executive Director of the Community Foundation of North Central Washington, and Sonia Warzel, Director of Research at the Oregon Community Foundation. Before we begin, I'd like to take just a few moments to go over some logistics with you. First of all, make sure that you close all programs on your computer other than GoToWebinar. We highly encourage you to call in using a telephone instead of your computer speakers and microphone. Mute your phone, and if you experience any issues with the visual part of the webinar, please send me a chat using that chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. You can also contact GoToWebinar at the 800 number listed there. We will be recording the webinar today, and that will be available for download hopefully later today, definitely this week. And we are also offering CFRE credit for participating in this live webinar, and the details on how to get your certificate will be emailed to you. Okay, I will hand it over to Aggie.
Great. Thanks a lot, Nerea. We're real excited to have all of you with us today. I know folks are still in the process of dialing onto this webinar, but we have over 140 that are registered. The Giving USA 2015 report, as you likely are aware, was released 2 days ago. You can download the highlights for free from the givingusa.org site. You can also purchase products, including the full report, the graph packs, full data tables. And if you want to get a 30% discount for any of those products, please enter the code that you see on the screen, 3015GI. And I really do encourage you to purchase some of the products and to get into more detail. Let me highlight what we're going to be talking about today, and then I'll introduce our panel. We'll do quick highlights of the Giving USA 2015 report with a special perspective on local giving with an emphasis on Oregon, Central Washington, and Idaho. We'll talk some about mega gifts and what we're seeing in the Northwest, and also trends in community foundations and donor advised funds. Let me introduce our panel. I'm, as you know, Aggie Sweeney, President and CEO of Collins Group. I'm also, through our firm's membership in Giving Institute, I serve on the Giving USA Foundation board, and am privileged to currently be serving in the vice chair role. So I have the opportunity year-round to interact with the researchers behind Giving USA and to get a lot of the insider scoop. We're honored today to have Bob Hoover joining us. He's Executive Director of the Idaho Community Foundation, and Bob has announced that he will be retiring no later than March of 2016 from his current role. He's been with Idaho Community Foundation for 5 years, and prior to that had a very distinguished 37-year career in higher education. As Bob has mentioned to me, this is his third retirement. We will find out if it's his final one. But before providing leadership for ICF, Bob was president of the College of Idaho and also president of the University of Idaho. And before that, served the University of Nevada, Reno, and Utah State. Beth Stipe is joining. Good morning, Bob. Thank you. And Beth Stipe is joining us from Central Washington. Beth is the Executive Director of the Community Foundation of North Central Washington in Wenatchee. Beth has served as the Executive Director there since 2003, and she is only the second executive for the Community Foundation. We have learned at Collins Group, if whenever we're talking to nonprofits in the middle part of Washington State or wanting to learn about trends, we just get on the phone and ask Beth. And Beth is a very avid outdoors woman, as you can see in this photo. And one of my first, or at least recent, interactions with Beth was through a board that she serves on, the Washington State Parks Foundation Board. And third, Sonia Warso is joining us from Portland. Sonia is the Director of Research with the Oregon Community Foundation. Sonia took on this position in 2010 following a very distinguished career in research. And she is going to be bringing us some special reports specific to the state of Oregon. And we're just delighted to also have Sonia joining us.
Good morning.
So we have the opportunity for you to respond to 2 polls. This is your first one.
Hi, so we're wanting to know from what state you're joining us today. We'll keep this open just for about a minute. Washington, let's see. Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Alaska, or Hawaii, or some other state.
Thank you. Thank you for your quick response to those. We'll keep it open for a minute. And as we're doing that, I want to start to talk a bit about Giving USA. I know many of you follow the report every year, but some of the rest of you may be newer. Giving USA, this is the 60th edition. It's an annual report on philanthropy in America, and it's called Giving USA 2015, but it's the report for giving in 2014. The report is researched and written by the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University, and they have served as the researcher for a number of years.
Okay, so we have the poll results back. 71% of you are joining us today from Washington State, about a quarter of you from Oregon, and then the rest is split between Idaho, Montana, Alaska, Hawaii, which is great, and then a few others.
Great, great. Thank you for that. Let me start with a few headlines from this year's Giving USA. First, 2014 marked an all-time high for giving at a total estimate of $358 billion. This is a 7.1% increase, 5.4% adjusted for inflation over 2013. This represents 2.1% of GDP, and we'll talk more about the significance of that. And it's also our 60th year of the annual report of Giving in America. Not only are we reporting an all-time high, but there's some special retrospective of the past 60 years that's included in this year's report. Let me highlight 2014 contributions by source. Giving by individuals comprised 72% of total giving in 2014. Giving by foundations, and this includes independent, community, and operating foundations, amounted to 15% of all the gifts made last year. Giving by bequest accounted for 8% of all gifts made in 2014. And this includes $22 billion from estates with assets of $1 million or more, and $6 billion from estates with assets of less than $1 million. Giving by individuals, bequests, and family foundations amounted to an estimated 87% of total giving. And giving by corporations comprised 5% of the total giving. Giving by individuals increased by 13.9 billion, or by 58%. Excuse me, it increased by 13.9 billion. When we look at the increase in giving, 58% of the total increase is giving by individuals. So let's look at the recipients of the giving. And this pie has 10 sections to it, the smallest being gifts to individuals, which we actually aren't going to report on much. But of the remaining 9 pieces to the pie, 8 of 9 of them saw an increase over the previous year. Giving to religious organizations received the largest share of charitable dollars at 32% of the total. And giving to religion has been the biggest sector in all 60 years of the Giving USA reporting. The education subsector received the second largest share of charitable dollars at 15% of the total. Human services received 12% of the total. Gifts to foundations, and this includes independent, community, and operating grant-making foundations. It was 4th largest with a 12% of the total, just behind human services. The health subsector received the 5th largest share at 8% of the total. Public society benefit organizations received 7% of the total charitable dollars. And the arts, culture, and humanities subsector received the largest proportion, the 7th largest proportion at 5% of the total. Gifts to international affairs are 4% of the total, and that's the sector that saw a decrease compared to the previous year. Environment and animals, 3% of the total, and gifts made directly to individuals, just 2%. Let's take a look next at how giving by source compared to the previous 2 years. So just to orient you, the black bar is the difference in 2013 compared to 2012. The gold bar, the difference in 2014 compared to the previous year. And then off to the right side, we're looking at the total change in giving over 2 years. Total charitable giving increased 1.6% in current dollars between 2012 and 2013, and then increased 7.1% between 13 and 14. So as you can see, a significant increase this past year. The 2-year change is 8.8% in total giving. Giving by individuals, as you can see, increased significantly. And current dollar grant making by independent, community, and operating foundations increased 7.6%. It's interesting to note that grant making by community foundations rose faster, and it increased by 10.9%. I want to point out that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, definitely the largest foundation in the world and one that we track very closely here in the Northwest, they paid out $3.42 billion in grants in 2014. I also want to point out that charitable giving has grown faster than the GDP and generally healthier than the overall economy. This shows changes in giving by the type of recipient organization. And again, a similar chart to the previous one. Giving to religion has had an increase both of the last 2 years, and it increased a total of 8.6% in the 2 years combined. Giving to education increased again this year, but not quite as quickly as in 2013. Giving to human services, an increase in both years. Giving to health, the 2-year increase is 11.8%. Giving to public society benefit increased 6.6% in 2012 compared to 2013, and you can see a 5.1% increase in 2014 for a 2-year increase of 12%. And let me comment a little bit on public society benefit, because this category includes several nonprofits that sometimes we lose where they are, how they get categorized. Giving to federations such as United Way or the Jewish Federation gets included in public society benefit. Giving to commercial donor advised funds get included in this area also. But giving to donor advised funds that are held at community foundations is giving to foundations, and giving to donor advised funds that are held at specific institutions, such as at a major university, fit into the category of that institution. And you can see the rest. And again, the only sector that has experienced a 2-year decrease is international affairs. And we really attribute that to the fact that there hasn't been a major international disaster that has received significant philanthropic support in the last 2 years. So let's take a look at total giving over 40 years. And I find that looking at the long view is often almost more. Total giving in 2014 was a significant increase both in current dollars and inflation-adjusted dollars compared to the previous year. 2009 was the last year of the Great Recession, and for the years 2009 to 2014, the rate of change in total inflation-adjusted giving was 18.2%. The worst recovery period for charitable giving between the last year of a recession and the 5th year following a recession was in 1975 to 1980. And at that point, the inflation-adjusted giving rose only 11.2%. Our recovery, the period of 2009 to 2014, is now the fastest recovery period on record in the past 40 years. So all of us have felt like this recovery has been kind of slow, and it's exciting this year to see that giving has fully recovered post-recession, but it's also interesting to realize that as slow as it has seemed for us, it's actually been a quick recovery for giving. So we have another poll.
Hi, yeah, this is Nerea again, and we would like to know if your experience at your organization reflects what we're seeing in the report data, or if you experienced something different. I'll launch it now. And your options are giving went up 5% or more, it went up just between 1% and 5%, it went down 5% or more, it went down between 1% and 5%, or it stayed about the same.
Okay, so as you're filling out that poll, I'm going to go ahead and go through more data, and I'm going to cover the next information really quickly. We're happy to take some questions at the end, and you can get more data, of course, if you want to download the full report. This shows giving by the source, and you can see that over the 40-year trend that giving by individuals has had a bit of a decline, but giving by foundations has increased, and most foundation endowments were originally gifts from individuals. you can see that giving by bequest and giving by corporations has remained pretty consistent over the 40-year period. And I love this chart because so often I present to a nonprofit board and they just think that if we just write more grants to foundations and corporations that their organizations' giving needs will all be met. And this definitely shows that the giving never has and isn't coming primarily from those sources. This shows in a bit of a different view the same information, but just shows, especially in an inflation-adjusted dollars, for some of the changes in giving by various sectors. This shows the total changes in giving, and you can see that as we got into the middle of last decade with the huge growth in wealth, that there was a significant increase in giving and then plummeting during the Great Recession, and now we fully recovered from that. I mentioned earlier giving as a percent of gross domestic product, and this is something that we've been tracking, and over the last 40 years, you can see that there's only been 3 times where we've gotten up as high as 2.1% of GDP is how much giving is as a percent of GDP. And it's quite a significant difference. In the profession, we have long said our goal is to get total giving significantly above 2% of GDP, as much as 2.5 or 3, and that would be quite significant. And this shows that where we are right now is at an all-time high in this proportion. Giving has closely tracked to the changes in the stock market, as you can see on this chart, and often giving will have a 1 or even 2-year rebound compared to when the stock market has significant years. Individual giving as a percent of disposable income is up to 2% in 2014. It was higher in some other growth years in the past 20 years, and we're hoping, of course, if the economy continues to be strong, that this will be up even higher in 2015. This shows how significant the growth in giving to foundations has been, especially over the last 20 years. Corporate giving, while it has been a consistent 5% of total giving, when you look at corporate giving as a percent of corporate pre-tax profits, it actually is pretty much at a 40-year low right now. Giving to public society benefit, as you can see, it's had a very steady increase in the last 15 years particularly, and we'll talk a bit more about this with donor advised funds in a few minutes. We already mentioned why we think the giving to international affairs has gone down a bit. And here, when we compare the type of recipients that are receiving money and look at it over time, we can see that giving to religion has, of course, continued to be the biggest piece of the pie, even though it's decreased over time. And you can see how giving to international affairs and environment and the animals and public society benefit has really increased over time. So I want to wrap up our overview of the national data and take a few minutes to hear from local perspective. And Sonia, Director of Research at Oregon Community Foundation, thank you for joining us, and we are delighted to have you with us.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. Today I'm going to spend a few minutes speaking with you about a report that OCF compiles each year called our Giving in Oregon report. And this report, like Giving USA, tracks charitable giving annually, and in our case focuses specifically on Oregon. I'm going to share some highlights from our 2014 report, which utilized 2012 data. So the data I'm sharing is a bit behind the data just released this week from Giving USA, and we draw on a couple of different data sources as well. But there are some similar trends overall, and our local data offers some additional insights into conditions within Oregon that I want to share with you. Next slide, please. So what you're seeing here is a chart that we had in our 2014 report that took a look at charitable giving rates from the point of the start of the Great Recession in 2007 up through 2012. And what you can see that mirrors the data that we saw nationally is that certainly charitable giving took a dip during the recession and has been climbing quite steadily and rapidly since then. Overall, we find that charitable giving rates in Oregon are consistently higher than the national average, and you can see that here in this graph. And in fact, in Oregon, we surpassed the pre-recession high back in 2012, and we're seeing just in this week's data that the national rates are now surpassing the pre-recession high. Let's go to the next slide. What I want to spend a few minutes talking about now is focusing on what we know about charitable giving by region within Oregon. As a statewide community foundation, we strive to be a resource to and a partner with all corners of the state. And Oregon, like many other western states, is characterized by one large metropolitan area, a few much smaller urban areas, and then vast expanses of quite rural areas. And we find that typically more than half of the charitable dollars flowing to Oregon's nonprofits go to nonprofits in the Portland metropolitan area. And on the one hand, this certainly is not surprising, as Portland is by far the largest population hub and therefore has more nonprofits than other areas in the state. But while it may be logical for Portland to get the lion's share of donations, this can sometimes come at the expense of our rural communities. Charitable dollars may be less likely to come from and therefore flow to rural communities. For example, when we take a look at our 2012 data, we see that while there were over $1.8 billion in contributions overall to Oregon's nonprofits, over $1 billion of those dollars went to Portland area nonprofits. And in fact, we found that only 10 counties in the state reported more than $1 million in contributions to local nonprofits. So this left 26 counties in Oregon that receive consistently less than $1 million a year in annual contributions to local nonprofits. At OCF, we're really highly attuned to this issue, and we strive to ensure that our grant making truly is statewide. And in fact, each year through our responsive grant program that's open to nonprofits throughout the state, we do tend to award more grants proportional to population outside of the Portland area than within Portland. But this geographical distribution of charitable resources is something we all need to be continually assess. And it's, as you know, it's a challenge to meet the needs of both our urban centers while also ensuring that our rural neighbors have the resources that they need. Let's go to the next slide. I want to shift gears now and talk a bit about motivations for charitable giving. Our Giving in Oregon report does a pretty good job at tracking charitable giving rates over time, but that report doesn't address the question of what motivates individuals to give, and this was something that was quite interesting to us to uncover a bit. So in 2013, OCF was a co-sponsor of a large statewide values and beliefs survey that covered any number of issues. But one of the questions on the survey did ask Oregonians about what motivates them to give to charities. And you can see on this chart the responses. You can see the top two responses there may not be surprising to you, helping others who are less fortunate and to make the world a better place. And of course, individuals can have multiple reasons for giving, and what you're showing here on this graph are just what respondents indicated as their primary reasons for giving. I want to call your attention to the fourth motivation listed on this graph, which is to be part of a group doing better things. And the reason I want to call your attention to that particular motivation is because I think there's a trend here that we're seeing in Oregon as well as nationally that's worth paying attention to. While this garnered just 7% of the responses as the top motivator for giving, I believe that we're going to see this motivation increase in importance. And I think actually we already are. Here at OCF, one way that we've seen an indication of this is in growth of donor advised funds, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes, so I won't go into more details about that right now. But we see it in Oregon in other ways as well. And one exciting example that I want to share is in 2004, the creation of the Women's Foundation of Oregon, the first statewide foundation of women for women in Oregon. Its mission is to focus the power of women's collective resources to improve the lives of women and girls throughout Oregon, and within its first year, it has gained 500 members and counting. So donors are really eager to connect with others and to share their passions, and also are increasingly interested in leveraging their charitable dollars for greater impact. So I think I'll stop there for now and pick up on that theme when we talk about donor advised funds in just a few minutes.
Great. Thank you, Sonia. Great information. Next, we're going to go from to Central Washington and get a view from there. Beth?
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Just fine. Great.
Great. We got our muting issue taken care of. So good morning, everyone. My name is Beth Stipe, and I'm Executive Director of the Community Foundation of North Central Washington. And for those of you that are familiar with community foundations, we're a little bit different than our friends to the south, the Oregon Community Foundation, and our friends to the east, the Idaho Community Foundation. We are a regional foundation. We cover 3 counties in north central Washington, Chelan, Douglas, and Okanagan counties. All of those counties are rural, they are ag-based, and we have a definite lack of organized philanthropy in the sense that we do not have large private foundations or corporate foundations or corporate connections in our region. Our population is approximately 200,000 between the 3 counties, and our largest urban area is about 50,000 people. So we're a little bit different in that we really are centered on a rural community foundation. So our experience is a little different in the terms of the trends in giving, and we see the vast majority of the funds that come to the Community Foundation, and I would say to the other not-for-profits in the region, coming from private philanthropy and individuals, which does tie nicely to the trends that we see in giving in the United States. We see the vast majority of our funds coming to us at a time during an estate bequest. What we find in our region is that people are very private with their wealth, and that the vast majority of the giving that they do is they do what we would call checkbook giving during their lifetimes, where they'll write annual gifts. But this idea of creating vast pots of charitable dollars or creating endowments or major gifts typically happens upon bequest in our region. That being said, donor-advised funds for us are not very common. They make up approximately 11% of the total funds and assets that we hold on our books. And just to kind of give you a little bit of some statistics for us, gifts in 2013 to donor-advised funds were 15% of the total gifts that we received. We saw a decline in gifts from 2013 to 2014, which is very different from what we looked at in the Giving USA reporting. But what we did see, which was interesting, was that of those dollars that we received in 2014, 33% of those went into donor-advised funds. So that is basically, we doubled the amount of dollars in 2014 that went into donor-advised funds versus 2013. Now, the other thing that I think is really interesting from our perspective is that when we do our grant making, our community really likes scholarships, and we hold almost 100 scholarship funds out of our total funds. We have about 420 funds here, and 25% of those are scholarship funds. Only 11% are donor-advised funds. But donor-advised funds make up 11% of the, or I'm sorry, 38% of the total grants and scholarships that we give in our communities on an annual basis. And so what we see happening with our donor-advised funds in particular is that our local communities are using those to get money out very quickly. The vast majority of our donor-advised funds are not endowed, so they are being spent out and refilled on a pretty rapid basis when it suits our donors who are savvy enough to understand how to utilize those. And I can't tell you how many times I talk to donors who will come in and they want to establish a fund and they want to write me a check. And I tell them, well, how about a stock gift? And they just kind of look at me cross-eyed like, no, we don't give away our stock. We will write you a check. So I think the sophistication in our communities in particular is maybe a little lagging from, say, our friends down in Oregon who have quite a robust donor-advised portfolio in that arena. And the other thing that I wanted to just mention really quickly is that we had a tremendous fire season last year. In July of 2014, we had the Carlton Complex fire. That was the largest fire in Washington State history. And it destroyed over 300 primary residences in Okanogan County. Okanogan County in Washington State is just to the north. It borders the Canadian border. And it is a very, very poor county. I think it's the third poorest county in the state. And the vast majority of those primary residences were uninsured. We know that about 50% were completely uninsured, and many more above that were underinsured. And so there was quite a bit of giving that came in from literally all over the world, and the Community Foundation was able to help to facilitate those gifts. And we saw quite a bit of giving from donor advised funds from our partner to the west, the Seattle Foundation, as well as several gifts from Vanguard and Fidelity Charitable gift funds from people all over the country. And I think the thing that resonated with me is that when we looked at the amount of gifts that came in during that initial 2-week time frame after the fires struck, the gifts that came in from those donor advised funds for us were major gifts. They were all $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. And so I had to giggle when we were doing our little report or get together, and they were talking about major gifts, and they asked, the Collins group asked, how many major gifts, millions of dollars do you get? And I was thinking to myself, wow, we don't get any of those. So for us, the major gift is $10,000. And so, boy, I'm not sure we'd know what to do if we got a gift of $10 million bucks. It would be a very banner day around here. But anyway, it's all in perspective. But I think that from us, the fact that donor advised funds give donors the opportunity to quickly mobilize those kind of significant dollars in times of disaster or urgent need, I think is really a great testament to that particular philanthropic vehicle and how it can be effectively used throughout all sorts of places, whether it be in your own backyard or in someone else's backyard. So that was just a little bit of our perspective from the Carlton Complex fires.
Great, thank you, Beth. Great. And next, let's go to Idaho. Bob.
Good morning, I guess.
Good morning. Good morning.
Right in 2 different time zones, so it's difficult at times to figure out if it's morning or afternoon. If you take a look at our first chart, it'll give you a sense of the growth in assets since the recession, the Great Recession, hit at the Idaho and its impact on the Idaho Community Foundation. I think that the trend, obviously, in terms of looking at assets under management in 2013 and 2014 is very similar to the national data in that we've had really 2 good years. As it turned out, 2012 was also really quite a good year in the growth that we experienced, and our endowment has grown significantly. We're a rather traditional community foundation in the sense that we have tried to build our assets under management largely through the establishment of endowed funds. In recent years, we've also had a major expansion of the funds associated with agencies that are endowed as well. During 2008 to 2014, we grew by about $71.5 million in terms of the funds under management, and distributed during that period about 32.6 or 7 million in grants, and contributions to all funds totaled about 54 million during those years. Thus, the investment growth in ICF funds under management was about 49 million, but the total number of contributions in the dollar value was about 5 million more than that. So actually our contributions to 531 funds grew, or 519 funds grew $5 million more than the market return made during that particular period, which we think is pretty significant for a state like ours. Where did that growth come from? It came non-endowed fund growth, largely donor advised, was about $6 million more than the growth in endowed funds, which is somewhat contrary to our emphasis, but I think some more similar to what you would have found, what you would find in the national data. Bequests to donor-designated funds were a significant part of that growth, and agency funds, as I said earlier, made a significant increase in our growth. I think we had in 2008 about 42 agency funds. We now have 71, and they make up about $20 million of the endowed funds that we have at the Idaho Community Foundation. While our largest fund growth during this period was in donor-advised endowment funds, the dollar value was smaller than those of the other three sources. By that I mean the quantity of new funds established at ICF during the period was largest in terms of donor-advised endowment funds, but the value of them was smaller than the other three sources during that particular period, a 5 or 6 year period. So what types of things did the grants support during that period? Education, health services, human services, and scholarships were the largest recipients of the ICF grants. And if you take a look at the next slide, it'll give you a sense of the overall number of foundations or major foundations within the state of Idaho and the dollar value that they have in terms of giving in 2014. There are two missing, or actually four missing there. There's a Jerker Foundation and a Jerker Trust and a J.R. Simplot Family Company and Family Endowment and a Company Foundation that are missing from this chart. But nevertheless, it gives you a sense of the size of one of the principal foundation, the principal foundation in the state, and the size of the remainder of us for the most part. The J.A. and Catherine Albertson Foundation has been significantly involved in education, almost exclusively, and that really skews in many ways the percentage of grants from foundations to the various categories that are used to describe where those grants are going. So that gives you a sense of what we have seen in Idaho, and I think the summary is that 2012, 2013, and 2014 growth in contributions was very significant, and the granting has increased significantly, at least in terms of the endowed dollars that we're beginning to grant now. And over a period of time, obviously, that will have a major impact on philanthropy within the state of Idaho. That concludes my part.
Really great. Thank you. Really good information. And congratulations to you for how much more the Idaho Community Foundation is able to invest back in the community today than when you started.
It's been a lot.
We want to take a... I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's been a lot of fun.
Great. We wanted to take a few minutes and talk about mega gifts. This year, bring some data, national data back that relates to mega gifts, and then we'll talk about one of the mega gifts in the Northwest that has gotten national and international attention. So the Philanthropy 400 report comes out annually from the Chronicle, and I wanted to let you know that in the last Philanthropy 400 report, Oregon Community Foundation ranked 243 among all of the nonprofits for how much money was raised in the previous year. And this is a report that came out last fall, so some of the years between Philanthropy 400 and Giving USA are off a bit. But OCF in 2013 received $91 million in giving. The second largest the other largest community foundation in our region is the Seattle Foundation, and in the Philanthropy 400 report, the Seattle Foundation ranked 316, and in 2013 they received $66 million in gifts. I also wanted to mention that the top 50 donors last year, according to the Chronicle of Philanthropy, gave a total of $10.2 billion. The largest gift given last year that's been announced was a gift by Bill and Melinda Gates to their family foundation, and it was a gift of $1.9 billion. So not all of our nonprofits operate with gifts necessarily at that scale, but mega gifts influence philanthropy in big ways. So we wanted to, I wanted to show you a list that's posted on the $1 Million list that the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at IU maintains, that shows some of the biggest gifts that are on that list in Montana, Hawaii, Oregon, and Washington. But by no means is the list completely up to date for gifts in 2014. And then I want to turn things over to Sonia to have you give us an update on the Night Cancer Challenge.
Sure, happy to do so. For those of you who aren't in Oregon and may not be as steeped in this as those of us in Oregon are, let me just give you a bit of a background. Phil Knight and his wife Penny announced a $500 million matching gift to the Oregon Health Sciences University on the condition that the university match the gift dollar for dollar within 2 years. So the campaign now is rounding the bend on the necessary $500 million with a few months to spare. This gift obviously has raised the bar for what is known as a mega gift here in Oregon. And, you know, the gift really did raise some fear and some trepidation around issues such as, you know, will there be enough money to go around, and will other nonprofits suffer as a result of this? It's really too soon to take a look at the data to know for sure, as the Knights made their gift in 2014, so we'll have to wait a couple years to get the hard numbers to really answer that question. But, you know, I want to pose an alternate hypothesis as well. It could be that the challenge has helped to rise the tide for all boats here in Oregon. The challenge, rather than redistributing a finite supply of charitable giving away from other nonprofits to the Knight Cancer Center, could instead serve to increase the size of the overall charitable pie here in Oregon. And just one anecdotal example of that is that OHSU has reported that it has increased its fundraising overall in the last 2 years, not just for the Knight Cancer Center. On the other hand, is this going to be the case for Oregon's smaller nonprofits? That really still remains to be seen. So stay tuned, and maybe we can have this conversation again in a few years.
Great, thanks. Yeah, it's been exciting to see giving so elevated, especially considering how much everyone was expressing concerns when the challenge was first announced. Thanks for that. I wanted to really quickly mention the Giving Pledge, which was started by Warren Buffett and Bill and Melinda Gates in 2010. There's now 137 billionaires worldwide, representing 14 different countries, but more from America, that have committed to give half of their wealth to philanthropy. And there were 10 billionaires that have joined the Giving Pledge this year. So when we look to the future of philanthropy, this is very promising. We wanted to talk a little bit about donor advised funds and with a focus on community foundations, but I wanted to first share some data from the national commercial donor advised funds. And what we saw is, with fears of the fiscal cliff and possible changes in the charitable tax deduction, along with the growth in the economy, there was a huge increase in giving to donor advised funds. And it's estimated that as of 2012, the assets held in donor-advised funds totaled $45 billion. And you can see here for the 4 largest commercial funds what the contributions were that they received in 2014, how many grants were given out, and the size of those grants. And this data on the chart is what's reported in Giving USA this year. So we wanted to learn a little bit more, and we have some information here from the Idaho Community Foundation. Bob, do you want to highlight this for us?
Yeah, the contributions to ICF funds in that period of 2009 to 2014, you can see all our ICF funds received about 54, almost 55 million, and the endowed funds made up about pardon me, a little less than half of that. The grants from more than half of it, I should say. The grants from ICF funds coming out of those things, you can see the change there. It's interesting to look at the non-endowed funds. The non-endowed funds in terms of contributions and the non-endowed funds in terms of grants. A key part of the non-endowed funds would be the donor-advised non-endowed funds, which we actually call philanthropic funds or special project funds. Those particular funds have 2 very large individual funds in which, because of the slowdown in projects that were being contemplated and money came into those different funds, it's kind of skewed the look. When we did an analysis of all of our funds as part of the Council on Foundations, look at donor-advised endowed and donor-advised non-endowed funds in preparation for lobbying, obviously, with the Congress last year, we discovered that the turnover in our non-endowed donor-advised funds is really very significant, and that the dollars coming in 1 year are usually gone by the end of that first year, or certainly by the second year. So that particular chart that I have there is somewhat misleading and caused us to obviously have to look carefully at all of the funds we had to see whether, in fact, the intent was to move those dollars out of those donor-advised funds by the donors in a period of time which would meet the donor interests and obviously the nonprofit needs in our particular community.
Really interesting. Yeah, really interesting. Thanks. And Sonia wanted to share some additional information with us. Do you want to talk us through this?
I do. Thanks so much. Similar to trends nationally, OCF has really seen a huge growth in donor-advised funds starting around 2000, and we continue to see that steady growth. Approximately 1/3 of our funds are donor-advised funds, and 1/3 of our grant making comes from donor-advised funds. So we do about $20 million a year in grant making from our donor-advised funds. And I wanted to touch on a theme that we've seen over the last couple of years that just continues to grow stronger, and that's that we're finding that our donors are increasingly engaged in the work of the foundation. But this is really a two-way engagement, and let me explain what I mean by that. First, donors are really informing and influencing OCF. Donor interests are encouraging the foundation to research topics and take on new areas, and I can give 2 quite current examples of that. We've had a group of donors over the last year or so who are very interested in supporting libraries in Oregon, and they came together, pooled some resources from their donor-advised funds to actually commission and fund a needs assessment, a statewide needs assessment of Oregon libraries that we're wrapping up now. And the results of that needs assessment will help that group of donors be more impactful in their giving to libraries, and also will help us as a foundation overall in all of our grant-making avenues towards libraries. Another recent or current example of this is that we have more and more donors that are interested in the environment and providing some grant making from their donor advised funds for environmental causes. And similarly, we're wrapping up a project with a consultant now that who's really looking into the best ways for OCF to do some grant making in that area. But the other side of the two-way engagement street is that OCF really informs and influences our donors as well. We have several discretionary programs and initiatives in foundation identified priorities with our discretionary dollars, early childhood as well as some others. And our staff that work with our advised funds donors really work to educate our donors about these programs and gain their interest in the programs. And through that work, we've increased donor advised support to our initiatives over the past couple of years. And in fact, in 2014, donor advised funds made $2 million worth of grants towards our discretionary programs, and this accounted for about 10% of the funding overall for OCF discretionary programs. I know we're really running out of time, but I just want to close with saying just one or two things about commercial donor advised funds and our perspective on them here at OCF. We really see that the commercial donor advised funds serve a different purpose, and we don't necessarily look at them as competitors. For donors that want purely transactional giving, commercial donor advised funds may make sense. We see as the value added of OCF and really of all community foundations is that we can work with donors who want more engagement, donors who really value learning and knowledge and making connections, and who want to leverage their resources with others. We can work with families, sometimes multi-generations of families, to really identify and support their charitable goals.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I know some of you may have to drop off the call. We've received a number of questions, so we're prepared to go over time to address questions, and if we can't cover them when the webinar is still live, we will go ahead and respond individually to those that have submitted them. Thanks all of you for this good information. I want to make sure that if you want to be in touch with any of the four of us that are presenting today, you have our direct email addresses. I want to have Nerea in just a moment report out on the second poll so you know how you compare to the other organizations that are participating in today's webinar, and we will stay on the line for at least 10 more minutes and answer questions that have come in or are coming in. Nerea?
Great, thank you, Aggie. Yes, if you have questions, please type them into the questions box. Right now, I'll share the results of that second poll. So we had about 74% of you said that giving increased to your organization. About 40% said it increased 5% or more, and 34% said it increased 1 to 5%. And a couple of you commented that you know that giving increased, but you weren't sure of the percentage. And then just 11% said that giving was down, and then 15% of you said that the giving to your organization in calendar year 2014 stayed about the same.
So great. So good. Thanks. That's interesting data to have. Nerea, can you pick out, and I want to thank Beth, Bob, and Sonia for your excellent comments and your participation today. And I hope it works for all of you to stay on the line with us a few more minutes, because as we address these questions, I think all of us may be answering them.
Great. And very quickly, many of you asked if you would be able to download the slides of this presentation. Unfortunately, it contains many graphics from the Giving USA report. So we will be sharing the recording of this webinar with you, but not the slides themselves. But of course, you can go to the Giving USA website and download the free highlights, and we will also be emailing you that code to get 30% off the full report and other products.
And we could share the presentation if we just leave out the Giving USA copyrighted slides.
Yeah, that's true. I can add a PDF of the rest of the slides of the presentation for sure.
Great.
Okay, so here's a question from Tim. We've often noted that giving to religion is a marker for the rest of giving. While it's been growing, the percentage as a part of the whole has been shrinking. Any thoughts or warning signs there?
Oh, I think, do any of you on the phone want to respond to that? If not, I'll take it. You know, we know that there's a strong correlation between religious affiliation in churches, synagogues, or other spiritual communities and giving. So when we look at studies that look at who gives and who gives more, that religious affiliation is a strong indicator of someone that volunteers and is also philanthropic. And it's been interesting because giving to religion has been shrinking as a total piece of the giving, but when we look at the actual dollars, giving to religion was higher in 2014 than any time over the last 60 years that we've been doing Giving USA. So I think while it is a bellwether, we also see that it's interesting to continue to study it. In fact, in the Giving USA 2016, we plan to enhance our methodology related to giving to religion, and we'll probably be able to bring back more specific information to address your question and questions that others have.
Great, and if you have any further questions, please type them into that questions box in your control panel there.
Do you have any others that have come in? Nope. Yeah. Okay, great. Good. So it seems that the number of questions, I can see there's a lot of comments, but it looks like many of them really were not questions for us. So let me thank Bob, Sonia, and Beth for joining us. This has been a great overview of lots of information, and I really feel privileged to have your participation and expertise with Collins Group today on this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aggie.
It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Great. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.